Hey, soul survivors. So this I did a poll on the ringing of the ears and how it can lead to brain damage, things like that, because a lot of us have ears that constantly ring. And I was thinking about the damage that can be done to the brain. So we're going to discuss all these topics in depth, psychological damage that can be done, scientific evidence. So ringing in the ears commonly is referred to as tinnitus, but we're not really talking to that. Tinnitus is something that's typically associated with conditions like hearing loss, ear infections, exposure to loud noises, possibly earwax, but there are lesser known causes that I want to talk about, and also the mental illness. So lesser known causes related to external forces such as radio waves, microwaves, other forms of electromagnetic radiation, and understanding the influences requires a deep dive into the physiological mechanisms that are at play and the impact of the external factors on the auditory, our ear systems. So we do have electromagnetic radiation and its impact. I started thinking about this with the ringing that I have. I also, when I was 8 years old, was going deaf. I'm not deaf, but I kind of struggle with hearing. I am getting older. I have ringing in my ears. I also wanted to see with activity and just when you're sitting in silence, you hear this ringing. What does it do to your ears? Is it damage from when I used to listen to loud music, or is it something in the atmosphere? So electromagnetic radiation and its impact. Radio waves and microwaves. We all have microwaves in our homes. We're going to talk about different countries too, but radio waves and microwaves are forms of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. They're commonly used in various technologies, even the communication devices, radios, television, cell phone. So we're going to get into a lot of us with screen time. I noticed I was just kind of scrolling. I had 2.5 hours of screen time. A lot of my screen time is research or kind of checking my messages or connecting with friends, but that's a lot. You kind of get caught up in that. Some of us hold our phones out, but sometimes they're by our heads. Also, microwave ovens, radar systems. So these frequencies are generally considered safe at low levels, but prolonged or intense exposure has raised concerns on potential health effects, including auditory phenomena like ringing in the ears. So there are thermal effects. High levels of microwave radiation can cause heating of the tissues. The inner ear, being highly sensitive, can be affected by even small increases in temperature, potentially leading to the sensation like ringing or buzzing. I know when we had the solar eclipse, we were told not to look at the sun, and that's because it can heat up our retinas and cause eye damage. So sometimes you don't even notice what is going on. But the example, prolonged use of cell phones has held close to the ear can result in localized heating, which may affect the cochlear structures and cause temporary ringing. So even our cell phones, have you ever held your phone and it got hot? Non-thermal effects, non-heat related. There's growing evidence that non-thermal effects of EMFs, which are electromagnetic fields, can impact cellular functions and neural activity, things within our brain. These effects are less understood, but can involve things such as calcium ion channels. EMFs might influence the movement of calcium ions across cell membranes, and this altering cellular signaling in the auditory pathways. There's oxidative stress. EMFs can induce oxidative stress, leading to cellular damage in the auditory, the hearing system. The MAEs, those are the microwave auditory effect. One of the most intriguing phenomena related to electromagnetic radiation is the microwave auditory effect. And this is also known as the Frey effect, Frey. This phenomenon involves the perception of clicking, buzzing, ringing sounds when exposed to pulsed microwave frequencies, even in the absence of external sound sources. So the mechanisms of MAE. Thermoelastic expansion. Pulsed microwave radiation can cause rapid, minute heating of soft tissue in and around the ear. This rapid heating leads to thermoelastic expansion, generating pressure waves that are perceived as sound. by the cochlea, the part of our ears that help us with hearing. So this effect can occur at relatively low power levels and does not require damaging levels of radiation. There's the illustrative scenario that I have for you. It's a military radar technician. Let's say they report hearing persistent clicking sounds while working near radar equipment. So they do an investigation. It's found that the radar pulses are causing thermal elastic expansion in the technician's head, leading to the perception of these sounds. These sounds aren't happening, but they're causing the perception of them. They're causing a reaction for this person to hear it. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity, EHS, and that's a condition where people report certain symptoms. This includes the ringing in the ears when exposed to electromagnetic fields. While the scientific community remains divided on the validity of the mechanisms of EHS, we need to consider the subjective experiences of the people that are affected. So there are possible mechanisms, psychogenic factors. Some people who are researchers suggest that the symptoms of EHS, including auditory phenomena, may be psychosomatic. Psychosomatic is when you just make them up, they're not real, resulting from anxiety or stress related to the belief that EMFs are harmful. Like I said, I was going deaf when I was 8, and I still remember, this is one of my traumatic experiences. They asked me to raise my hand when I heard the sound. And so I was always a good girl, always wanted to do things right. I was obedient, and I raised my hand. And the technician thought I was joking. They thought I was being silly, but I heard a ringing, and she reamed me out. She was so upset with me. But I heard this ringing, and she didn't believe me. Sometimes I wonder, I was only 8 years old, just before I turned 8, really, that is it my brain expecting to hear something and I made myself hear it? Or, was it some of these damaging effects? So direct physiological impact. Other people propose that certain people may have heightened sensitivity to these EMFs, leading to real physiological responses, including auditory disturbances. So tell me if you guys have ringing in your ear. Is it constant? Does it go away? There are other external forces such as vibration, sound waves. So beyond electromagnetic radiation, other external forces such as vibration, intense sound waves can cause the ringing. Vibration, prolonged exposure to intense vibrations, such as those experienced by people on machinery, operators, or musicians, can cause damage to these delicate structures within our ears, leading to ringing or other auditory symptoms. So let's say a construction worker, they're working that jackhammer, they can sometimes experience persistent ringing due to the vibrations affecting their cochlear hair cells. Our hairs inside our ears help with the vibrations and the sense of hearing. Now, intense sound waves, exposure to very loud, low frequency sound waves known as infrasound, can cause auditory disturbances. These sound waves can induce vibrations in the inner ear. This leads to a perception of ringing or buzzing. So let's say somebody's living near those wind turbines. That's why a lot of people don't like them. That sometimes they report hearing a persistent low frequency hum, which can be attributed to infrasound generated by these turbines. Now, I've heard that hum. Have you guys heard it? I live in Michigan, and we don't have that many that I know of, but down in Indiana, you can hear a low hum. Addressing and mitigating external influence induced ringing, that there are preventive measures. Reduce the exposure. By limiting it, it can help mitigate the risk of developing auditory disturbances, such as using hands-free devices for cell phones, minimizing time spent near high-powered radio equipment. Use protective gear. Protective gear such as earplugs or noise-canceling headphones can help protect the ears from harmful vibrations and sound waves. There's also environmental modifications we can do. So shielding living and working environments from these excessive EMF exposures through the use of EMF blocking materials and devices, kind of soundproofing our home. And cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll see that a lot. They use that for borderline personality a lot of times, but individuals experiencing anxiety-related EHS symptoms. Cognitive behavior therapy can help manage the stress, reduce the perception of auditory disturbances. You can have your tinnitus retraining therapy, known as TRT. It can help people habituate to the sound and reduce their impact on daily life. I know I use white noise. I have a fan going in the background. You can take some medications at sometimes to address the underlying conditions such as sleep disturbances, anxiety, and that can help alleviate the perception of the ringing. So I do want to talk about the brain damage and exposure and its impact on personality. So these EMFs, radio waves, microwaves, other sources are generally, like I said, considered safe, but there's an increased concern about the potential for brain damage and subsequent changes in personality from prolonged or intense exposure. Understanding these mechanisms behind the damage, its effect on personality, is crucial to addressing the potential risks. Because I've been thinking about all the different mental illnesses are out there. And, I've talked before about how the autism, how it's like increased over the years, and just, narcissism and borderline and all these different things going on with people, like what is normal and, what is environmental, nature versus nurture. And since mental illness is on the rise, since it is being a shift between which men and women have what, and also the gender fluid stuff, I want to understand where the mental illness is coming from. There are psychopaths versus sociopaths. Some people are born with brain damage, or maybe there's some in utero component to it. But a lot of things are situational. And the reason I bring up autism is because is that environmental, because it's on such a rise. So with the ringing in the ears, they use that as warfare, and it can cause brain damage. So the thermal effects, you have localized heating. High intensity microwaves can cause that localized heating and the blood-brain barrier disruption. When you have those elevated temperatures, it can compromise the integrity of that blood-brain barrier, known as the BBB. And that protects the brain from harmful substances. A disrupted BBB can allow toxins, pathogens to enter the brain, causing inflammation and damage. Inflammation can cause a lot of damage. That's why people with traumatic brain injuries have damage from the pressure. So if a worker was exposed to high levels of microwave radiation, they can experience that BBB disruption, leading to neuroinflammation and potential cognitive deficits. That's where they're unable to think properly. Non-thermal effects, oxidative stress. EMFs can induce oxidative stress by generating reactive oxygen species, which is known as ROS. Oxidative stress can cause damage to the neurons and other brain cells, and this leads to long-term cognitive and behavioral issues. So if you have chronic exposure to the low-level EMFs from everyday devices, such as cell phones, this can increase oxidative stress in the brain, potentially contributing to neurodegenerative diseases where our brains are just kind of falling apart. That's why it's really important, if you have children, limit their screen time. They talk about like the teenagers and the mental illness. Is it partially because of this? Or is it, the body image dysphoria, all those kind of things, online bullying? But there's calcium ion dysregulation. EMFs can affect the movement of those calcium ions, and the dysregulated calcium signaling can impair the neural function and lead to the cell's death. Once it's dead, it's not coming back. So when you had those repeated exposures from wireless networks, it could disrupt calcium ion balance in the neurons, impairing brain function over time. Are our children getting smarter, or are they struggling more? And I'm a teacher. I've seen a change in the children over time. It's hard to tell what is causing that, but is it the two-parent households where everybody's working, or the separated families, or the increase in the mental illness and the growing up in a toxic environment? But is it the computers and the wireless internet? Is that compounding it? So you can have cell death. Both thermal, non-thermal effects of EMFs can lead to neuronal apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. The loss of neurons can impair cognitive functions and alter behavior. So the neurons in the hippocampus, a region which is critical for memory, can undergo apoptosis due to prolonged EMF exposure, leading to memory deficits. And I know I've been kind of struggling with short-term memory. Is it because of this? Is it because I'm getting older? You have your axonal injury, and the EMFs can damage axons, the long projections of neurons that transmit the signal. So you need those flare-outs to help with the signal passing. Axonal injury can disrupt the neural communication and leads to cognitive and emotional disturbances. So people are starting to have a harder time with their emotions. Damage to the axons in the frontal lobes can impair executive functions such as decision-making, impulse control. Is that why alcoholism or drug use is on the rise? You have your glial cell damage, and that is supposed to protect the neurons. But damage to these cells can impair overall brain function and contribute to the neural inflammation. So astrocytes, a type of glial cell, may become dysfunctional due to this EMF exposure, and it's leading to impaired neural support and increased inflammation. Now, the changes in personality due to brain damage, you got your emotional dysregulation, damage to the frontal lobes and the limbic system, can lead to difficulties in regulating the emotions. So people can experience heightened irritability, mood swings, impulsivity. A person with a frontal lobe damage from EMF exposure might become easily frustrated, might have aggressive behavior. You got your cognitive impairments. Neuronal damage can result in cognitive deficits, including memory loss, reduced attention span, impaired problem-solving abilities. Now, with the attention span, as a digital creator, I don't do it. I need to, but they have it where it's like 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds, you should be popping something up or changing your screen to keep people interested. It's really hard to just have someone. So if you guys are still here, give a thumbs up, because I'm proud of you for not needing all the glitz and glam. Some of it is we're programming ourselves to be dependent on entertainment instead of the information. But there can also be cognitive impairment due to these waves. So the cognitive changes can affect personality by reducing an individual's ability to function effectively in daily life. When you're starting not to be able to process things, or you're impulsive, so you're not meeting your responsibilities. So somebody with a hippocampal damage, they can struggle with memory tasks, leading to increased frustration and anxiety. They can have social withdrawal, cognitive and emotional difficulties, and it can lead to withdrawal from friends and isolation. People may avoid social interactions due to embarrassment or frustration within having those cognitive limitations. Like a person experiencing cognitive decline from EMF exposure might start to withdraw from social activities, leading to increased loneliness and depression. We'll talk more about other countries soon, but in America, so many people are depressed or full of anxiety. Some of it is stress from the work-life balance, but also the increase of technology could be, it seems like an answer to everything, but it can be damaging too. Long-term personality changes. You got your chronic stress and anxiety. When you have persistent cognitive and emotional challenges. This can lead to chronic stress and anxiety. These conditions can further exacerbate personality changes, and this starts to create a cycle of worsening mental health. So somebody might have chronic exposure to those EMFs, they start to develop generalized anxiety disorder characterized by persistent worry and nervousness, and that's not the way to live. And it kind of snowballs. You can have an identity crisis. Significant changes in cognitive and emotional functioning can lead to the identity crisis, where people start to struggle to reconcile their pre-injury self and their post-injury abilities and personalities. So a person who was previously confident and outgoing, they might become introverted, and now they're self-doubting due to the cognitive impairment just from this EMF exposure. So we have some scenarios like Michael, industrial worker, exposed to high level radiation at his job. And over time, he starts to experience memory lapses. So he's got some irritability, difficulty concentrating, and within the neuroimaging, it's kind of like an X-ray of the brain activity. So it reveals the damage to his frontal lobes and hippocampus. So you can actually see the damage. So Michael becomes increasingly withdrawn, struggles with tasks that were once easy, and this starts to lead to frustration, starts to change his personality. And a person, let's say Emma, a college student, she uses her cell phone for extended periods of time every day. She starts to begin to notice persistent headaches, difficulty sleeping, and that ringing sensation in her ears. She also starts to become anxious, struggles with her coursework, having a hard time focusing. Although the EMF exposure from her cell phone is low, the cumulative effect leads to oxidative stress and mild cognitive impairments, impacting her personality and her academic performance. So exposure to these electromagnetic fields, particularly from radio waves and microwaves, can cause various types of brain damage. And over time, it can lead to significant changes in personality. So while the thermal effects of high intensity EMFs can cause direct tissue heating, disrupting of the blood-brain barrier, non-thermal effects like oxidative stress, calcium ion dysregulation also play crucial roles. These changes can result in emotional dysregulation, cognitive impairment, social withdrawal, chronic stress, identity crises. Understanding these mechanisms is important, and utilizing any therapeutic interventions or changing your habits, and the brain damage and subsequent personality changes, I just thought it was important. But how the electro fields can cause this brain damage. You got the heat, where the tissue absorbs microwave radiation. The energy causes water molecules to vibrate, starts to produce heat. In the brain, this can disrupt the structure and the function of proteins, lipids. Lipids are fats. This leads to cellular damage and death. So prolonged exposure just to a powerful microwave source, such as an industrial microwave, it can increase brain temperature and result in thermal burns to neural tissues. We talked about the BBB, blood-brain barrier. And the endothelial cells, they start to loosen, and that BBB starts to have potentially harmful substances, inflammatory cells begin to penetrate the brain. So they've had research on rats exposed to these microwaves, and they show an increased permeability, where it kind of goes through, of the BBB, allowing albumin and other large molecules to enter the brain tissue. And this leads to neuroinflammation and damage. And so we talked about the oxidative stress, and it can interfere with the mitochondrial function. The cell's powerhouse is what mitochondrial function is, and this leads to excessive production of ROS. These reactive molecules can damage structures and induce apoptosis, which is, we talked about programmed cell death. So they have some studies that show exposure from mobile phones can increase levels of oxidative markers in the brain, and that suggests that long-term exposure can contribute to neurodegenerative conditions. We talked about calcium ion dysregulation. It can alter the gating properties of voltage-gated calcium channels, resulting in abnormal intracellular calcium levels. So altered calcium homeostasis due to the EMF exposure can lead to excitocity, a condition where excessive glutamate release and calcium influx cause neural injury and death to the cells. Apoptosis, and necrosis. So oxidative stress, the calcium dysregulation, can activate apoptotic pathways and release the cytochrome C from mitochondria and activation of caspases. So necrosis, death, can result from severe cellular injury, loss of membrane integrity, and you have your axonal injury, and that can result from the thermal effects, indirect oxidative stress, and it causes the axons to lose their ability. So, you know, you might want to think twice about being around certain things. You know, you have microglial activation, that is the brain's immune cells. Exposure can activate microglia, leading to neural inflammation. So it just goes on and on. You have the emotional dysregulation. You got damage to the frontal lobes, the limbic system. People are starting to have regulation problems with their emotions, their stress. So how do you guys feel about the damage that is done from just microwaves and sound waves? Let me know your thoughts. I'll do a follow-up video that deals with the different countries.